Nothing says summer like a blueberry pie. To make it extra special, I often make mine with a lattice top, which not only allows you to take a peek at the colorful filling inside, but it also acts as a vent for steam escape. It may look complicated, this particular lattice, but I'll share my trick for making it as easy as pie. First, the pâte brisée. 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose unbleached flour and 1½ teaspoons of granulated sugar and 1½ teaspoons of salt. So the first thing I do is mix up my dry ingredients by pulsing. That's called pulsing, up and down, up and down. And then you can add your butter. 3 sticks of butter, and the butter has been neatly cut into 1/4-inch cubes. This makes it very easy to get the right texture of pastry by preparing your butter like this. And it's icy, icy cold. The golden rule of pâte brisée is make it cold. Everything, the flour, the butter, the ice water, and then pulse. And then you add 1/2 cup of ice water. And notice how I'm pulsing and adding the iced water sort of on the outside of the feed tube. There. I think we have our pastry. Take it off, and with this much, I'm going to divide it into 3 equal discs of dough. You can use your plastic to pull the pastry together. And if it's a warm day, work as quickly as you can. Do not let this pastry get warm. It will not be the kind of flaky pie crust that you want. So there. Just place them on a baking sheet and put them in the refrigerator for at least an hour. So now for the filling, which is 3 pints of blueberries, the zest of 1 lemon, and also the juice of a lemon. The combination of lemon and blueberry is just spectacular. Very good for you. 1/2 cup of sugar, only 1/2 cup. Can't complain that it's too sweet. 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. Cornstarch will be very helpful in thickening the juices that come out of the berries. And a traditional spice is cinnamon for blueberry, or just 1/4 teaspoon though. You can stir this up, and a little sprinkling of salt will also be nice for the filling. And 2 tablespoons of butter. Just cut the butter into little pieces and stir this all together. The butter helps enrich the juices that are being thickened by the cornstarch. It's a whole little method. And this is ready to put into the pie. So now I'm going to roll out 1 disc of the pastry to fit the bottom of the 9-inch glass pie plate. So I think that is a very nice size for the pie plate. If you have difficulty lifting up your crust, the easiest I find is just to roll it on the pin like this and unroll it into your dish. And then don't use your sharp fingernails if you have them. I don't have them, but use the back of your fingers like this to press this into the dish. And then what I do is I put this right back into the fridge and chill it while I'm rolling out the rest of the topping. And now for the lattice top of the pie, just roll your dough into a square approximately 11 inches. And we're going to cut this into strips. Big pie day, you don't have to go to the gym. Get lots of upper body exercise. And you can transfer this piece onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. There. And get that into the fridge while you roll out the third. So here we have our chilled dough, and you cut this into 1-inch strips. There. And save your scraps. You might need them for something else. So you'll cut this piece and your second piece into the 1-inch strips. So now you're going to place this on top of 2. You're going to lift 2. So this is the beginning of your lattice. Then you're going to go under, basically basket weaving 101. And the colder your dough is, by the way, the easier it is to weave. So there, now get that right back into the refrigerator, chill it, then you'll put it on top of your pie. So now get your gorgeous blueberry filling into your bottom crust. Now brush the edge of the pastry with egg yolk. This is your glue. It's going to let the lattice adhere right to the top of the pie. Now this, we've trimmed the edges. Just lift this right on top of the entire blueberry pie and press all the way around the edges. And then with a pair of scissors, just trim about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of your pie plate. So now take your fingertips and tuck this under. Just make sure it's really sealed. And then brush with the same egg yolk to give a beautiful, beautiful golden brown color to the lattice. And I'm also going to sprinkle with sanding sugar to give an added crunch to this pie. Now your oven should be preheated to 425 degrees. Put the pie right in and bake for 20 minutes. And then reduce the heat to 375 and continue baking until the filling is bubbling and the crust is evenly browned. 60 to 75 minutes. So this is what the pie looks like when it comes out of the oven. So here we have another disc of pastry. This is pâte brisée, and it is the basis for our coconut cream pie. And this pie is filled with a wonderful custard made out of coconut and coconut milk. And it's topped with whipped cream, another one of my favorites. I keep saying that, but why would I be teaching you anything but my favorites in this show? I want you to know how to make these pies that I have enjoyed over the years. You should know how to make them also. So roll your pastry. Notice I am rolling in one direction and just lightly letting the rolling pin come back towards me without any pressure. Keep your surface well floured, but not too heavily floured. And just make sure while you're rolling that you're constantly moving your pastry so that it is not sticking to the rolling surface. If it sticks, you're going to have a lot of trouble lifting it up off the surface, and you will not have a good pie crust. Okay, so this looks pretty much the right size. It will overhang the edges, which is what I want. Now to lift off the counter, if you were paying attention in the first lesson for pâte brisée, you have learned this already, but roll on your rolling pin like this. That lifts the whole thing up without tearing, without breaking, and then carefully roll it off the pin into the dish, just like that. It's a foolproof method for getting that pastry into the dish. Now, your edges are a little rough. Trim with your scissors all the way around. You want a nice big edge on this one. Some people use a knife for this, but I find the scissors really works very well. Okay. Now roll this under. But see how I'm letting it hang over the edge a little bit. Important for this particular spoon handle fluted edge. The bottom will be docked a little bit with a fork. Now to do this spoon edge, flour your handle, and you'll use your finger like this and your spoon to make the edge. Pretty. Many, many ways to make a pie crust. Get this right into the refrigerator or the freezer to chill again. So now we're going to blind bake this crust. The crust has been docked with a fork. Docking prevents erupting during baking. You want to keep the crust nice and flat, so by making these little tiny steam holes, the pastry stays flat in the dish. Now we have to line this with a piece of paper. Some people use aluminum foil. I just don't like having the aluminum on my pastry, so I always use a parchment. Very much like lining a cake tin. If you want to make a large round, fold your square of parchment into some triangles, and I just trim it off with my shears. And then crumple this all up like this. It looks kind of silly, doesn't it? But the more you crumple your paper, the more it will lie flat in your crust. This is better to have a used piece of parchment paper. So there. It's more malleable this way. And now just lay this, and now fill with pie weights. Pie weights can be store-bought. You can buy little aluminum pie weights, or you can use an assortment of dried beans. And they have been used to fill many a pie crust. They weight down the crust. They heat up. They're cooking the top of the crust while the oven is cooking the underside of the crust. And they keep everything nice and flat and keep the crust in the dish. Keeps it from shrinking down in the dish. So this should go right into a 375-degree oven. Bake until the edges of the crust are a light golden brown. That takes about 25 minutes. Then we remove the beans or the weights and then bake a little bit more, maybe 10 minutes more, until it's all evenly golden brown. And now for the custard filling. So you'll need 4 egg yolks separated from their whites. Now, it's a thickening of cornstarch, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and 1/2 cup of sugar. Mix these together in your saucepan because you'll get all the lumps out of the cornstarch. That's the cornstarch. Quite floury. And add 1 1/4 cups of whole milk and 1 1/2 cups coconut milk. Coconut milk differs from coconut cream. There's a much thinner version, and you can make your own if you have a fresh coconut, but you can also buy coconut milk. Into this liquid, add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Have your egg yolks ready. As soon as it starts to thicken, you will temper your egg yolks and then add them back. It's already getting thick. I'm now going to stir with a wooden spoon. So this custard, like others, can be baked or stirred on the stovetop. A custard like this requires slow cooking and gentle heat in order to prevent separation or curdling, and be very, very careful. It's like making a creme brulee or a cup custard. So everything is nicely dissolved. It's time now to temper the egg yolks. I'm going to take a little bit of the mixture and whisk it into the egg yolks in a thin stream. You don't want to cook the egg yolks. You just want to temper them. Bring them as close to the temperature of this liquid as possible without cooking them. Because the egg yolks, in addition to the cornstarch, act as the thickeners for the custard. Yeah, that's good. Nicely tempered. And now you can just put this whole thing back into the pot and continue cooking over low heat until the mixture thickens and coats the back of a wooden spoon. Now, I'll show you what I meant by coating the back of a wooden spoon. It's coated, and you can draw a line in it, and that line, tasty, will stay. Now, 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla, and 1 cup of the very best shredded sweetened coconut. Stir that in, and that is your custard filling. You could just put this into little custard cups and feed it to the kids as coconut pudding. It's very good, but it will be even better in our gorgeous crust. Now I want to show you why this is such a good crust. Not only is it the right color underneath as well as on top, but it also lifts out of the dish. It holds together, and yet it is still tender and crispy. So that's a fine pâte brisée recipe. So now just pour this into your pie shell. And that's your coconut cream custard. Now take a piece of plastic wrap, lightweight if you can find it, and just place it over the custard and refrigerate until the custard itself is totally chilled. Do not freeze, because freezing and thawing can cause the filling to separate. Just not a good idea. So the pie filling has completely chilled. It doesn't move. That's good. And now you can dollop on some softly whipped cream. This is 1.5 cups of heavy cream and 2 tablespoons of confectioner's sugar whipped in. And it looks good. You could put a little vanilla in your whipped cream also. Every last bit should go on that pie. And then you can kind of swirl it a little bit. I like to make sure I cover the entire custard without covering the crust, of course. Now these are old-fashioned deep pies, which are very satisfying to eat and very delicious. And as I said in the beginning of the show, once you master the art of making the pie crust itself, you will feel very good about making pies on a regular basis at home. Tastes very good. Toasted coconut. This is fresh coconut, or you can buy coconut flakes like this and lightly toast them in the oven. If you're going to make your own out of fresh coconuts, take a vegetable peeler and make flakes and just brown those flakes on a cookie sheet in the oven, and they will brown nicely. I think this looks really good. You don't have to use all of them, but I'm going to. And voila! A very, very nice coconut cream pie that you are going to devour. I hope I've been able to teach you how easy it is to make some incredible pies. Now I'm going to show you how to make cherry tart filled with that wonderful pastry cream. Pâte brisée, which is my basic pie crust, has no eggs and very little sugar. And the pâte sucrée has 2 egg yolks, and the pâte sucrée extra has an extra egg yolk. So that's what we're making. 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, unbleached, a pinch of salt, 1/3 of a cup of sugar. And I'm going to just pulse this a little bit. It's the same thing as sifting it. Using a food processor it makes this really, really easy. We have timed making it by hand and making it in a food processor, and I think it takes 16 or 18 seconds in a food processor, and it takes a lot longer by hand. Yeah. Maybe the butter is icy cold, 2 sticks cut up into beautiful cubes. Really helps very much in the cutting in process. I still want to have little tiny bits of butter visible. And then we have 3 large egg yolks and 1/4 of a cup of ice water. Beat this up a little bit.
Do you use sucré instead of brisée just for flavor? Is the texture preferred?
It's a little sturdier and tasty because it's sweet and pretty. It keeps its shape very nicely. And you can just pour this.
Now, can this be done ahead of time?
Oh yeah, you can keep it refrigerated overnight. Don't keep it too much longer. You know how pastry starts to get gray?
Yeah.
So, but look at the great color. And put this on a little bit of bench flour. You have to have enough moisture. You have to make sure it's not too dry. If it's too dry, you're going to have a really hard time rolling it out. Just divide this in half, because this will make 2 9-inch tarts. And wrap this in plastic wrap, a nice flat round. So these will go into the fridge. And we have one all ready to roll. We have a 9-inch tart shell. We want it to be larger than the pan. Now, how do you get the dough from here to there?
Roll it onto your rolling pin.
Good. And watch what you're doing. See, it went in very nicely. And then with the backs of your fingers, you can press into the pan. I like to reinforce the sides, and that reinforcing means doubling down a little bit. I push this down a little bit like that, all the way around. Now you can get the excess off. Press this down like that, and use your rolling pin to just break it off. And that works very well. It gives you a very nice crust. Chill this for about 20 minutes before you bake it. So we have our chilled shell, looks good. You don't have to dock it because it's a dense dough. The egg yolks keep it nice and flat. We're going to blind bake. And a piece of parchment paper looks like I'm getting ready to throw it away or throw it at somebody. But just wrinkle that up. It makes it more malleable and it'll fit nicer into the shell. Have your oven preheated to 375 and add your weights. These are all kinds of different beans and lentils, split peas, and they make a very nice weight. So this goes right into the oven for about 20 minutes. Remove the weights and the paper and bake until it's a nice golden brown. Here's our finished tart shell, nice crispy brown crust, and it's ready to fill. You have to pit the cherries. That's the time-consuming thing to do. So best to try to find a cherry pitter. The best one, I think, is this German version. And the pits fall into this container here. But don't you love that? This goes like fast, really great. Now this you can find in odd little hardware stores. You put the cherry right here. And you just push this down, and the pit goes into the jar, and the cherry is pitted. And then there's this one. I just want to show you all these versions because they're kind of interesting. This one, you put the cherry here, and you push down, and the pit comes out, and your cherry is done. So whatever way you choose to do it, 3½ cups of cherries. So cut these in half and add them to your 3½ cups. And now we're going to whisk the cream until it's nice and smooth. This is chilled. And add ½ cup of heavy cream whipped. This will lighten it slightly, enrich it slightly, and add a little bit of flavor. And I'm mixing that in. And now put this pastry cream right into your shell. Now you could chill this again if you'd like, but I'm going to put the cherries right on top. We're putting the cherries cut side up all the way around. And the stem end out or in, whichever way, but once you start, try to be uniform for the prettiest tart. So here, last cherry. And I have cherry jam that's been strained, and add a little Kirschwasser. And then dress your tart. Once you do this final little embellishment, put the tart in the refrigerator, let it chill before unmolding, cutting, and serving. Chewy chess tart. I like serving this by itself or with just a little bit of unsweetened whipped cream. And now for a cookie crust. This is made out of vanilla wafers, and you can grind these up in your food processor. Get them very fine. Okay, so there's your very finely ground Nilla wafers. Add 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 2½ tablespoons of sugar. And stir in your melted 6 tablespoons of butter. So that's your crust. So simple. I know your family will love this pie. Let me show you how to form this one. So fun to make because it is a no-roll crust. Spread it as evenly as you can in the bottom of a removable bottom 9-inch tart shell. This is like a quiche pan, tart shell pan. And with your fingertips, just pull up about 1/4 inch thick on the side. You can make this crust in advance. And now to flatten the bottom, you can just use the bottom of your measuring cup like this and really compress the crust. You're going to chill this before baking. What a neat and simple crust. It goes into a preheated 325-degree oven for 12 to 15 minutes. And now the filling for the tart, 3 whole eggs and 1 egg yolk. And add 1/2 teaspoon of the very best vanilla. There. To this, add your dry ingredients. 1 cup of granulated sugar. When I tasted this pie, I just fell in love with it. You can't eat a lot because it's very rich, but it is very tasty. Because really, there's not much in it except sugar and eggs and a half a cup of packed light brown sugar. Pack that in. And now this gets incorporated. And there's one surprise ingredient which gives a crunchiness to the filling that I think is very appealing, and that's cornmeal. 1 tablespoon of fine cornmeal. And add 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And one last ingredient, melted butter. 1 stick, 8 tablespoons, 1/4 pound. This is what gives the chewiness to the filling. Pour this in. Once filled, get this into a 325 oven, preheated, and bake this for about 35 minutes. This chess tart is done. Let this cool to room temperature and then chill it for an hour or so. And we have one that's already chilled right here, and I can put this on our serving pedestal. Oh, so pretty. Watch how easily the ring comes off. And you can just put this right on your decorative serving dish. And that is your chewy chess tart. Mile High Apple Pie is all about the apples and the crust. Flaky and light, encasing a big pile of 3 different kinds of apples. In order to learn how to make the best pâte brisée, you should really just follow the golden rules. Make it cold, bake it hot, and if possible, use a food processor. And so it's 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and you can just pulse that so the salt is evenly distributed. Even the salt can be cold. And 2 sticks of butter, and it should be cold and hard for this process of cutting the butter into the flour. And we're going to measure half a cup of iced water. So you want to pour your water while you pulse on the outside of your tube. So it looks like it's pretty much done. Okay, so just wrap this in a flat round in a piece of plastic wrap, and that is going to roll into 1 good pie crust. You need 2 of these. And now we're going to use our first batch of pâte brisée for Mile High Apple Pie. Today we're using different kinds of apples from Breezy Hill Orchards up in Staatsburg, New York. Jana Gold, these big red-tinged apples, very tart, very nice. Mutsu, these are large with a lot of deep flavor. And we're also adding to the mix today Granny Smiths. We're using 5.5 pounds of apples in this one pie. And we're going to also add to the apples, to keep them from turning brown, the juice of 2 lemons. I'm cutting off the tips of the lemons because they squeeze better in this handy tool that we use. Okay, so there. Now the apples also get 1 cup of sugar. And we're going to just sprinkle that over. And 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And a little pinch of salt. And 1/3 cup of flour. Just all-purpose flour. Now, if you use a metal spoon, you might break up your apple, so I suggest using either your hands to toss the fruit or a big rubber scraper like this. And so you're distributing all those lovely ingredients throughout the apples. Perfect. Ready for the filling. So now we have a nice crust rolled out to a little less than 1/8 inch thick. And then to get it into the bottom crust, just roll it up like this on your pin. And having a good rolling pin is important too, a big enough pin. So look how nice this looks. put in the apples. You know, these are going to cook down a little bit. They're going to get tender, and they will make a most exquisite pie. There. Oh, and before I forget, dot your pie filling with a little bit of unsalted butter. Okay, so here we have our crust for the top. And I think so that we have no chance of breakage, I'm going to just roll this on my rolling pin. This is a very good method for lifting up a delicate crust. Once you form your crust, crimp your edges, we're going to re-chill the pie in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes. You need a pair of scissors, and I'm just going to cut off the excess. Leave ½ inch or so hanging over the edge of the dish. Now watch, you're going to turn this over. Work fast because the pastry does soften up. That's nice. And now if you want to cut a few vent holes in the top, good idea. There, just little slits like this. Oh, and now crimp the edges. There's various ways to crimp. You can use these two fingers and your thumb of your other hand. My mom used a fork. Whatever's your favorite way of making a pretty decorative edge. Okay, so now, from your leftover pastry, I'll make a couple decorations for the top and vein the leaves with the back of your little paring knife. Chill these 20 minutes. We're ready to glaze the top of the pie. So the pie is nicely chilled. Let's apply the branches and leaves using water as your glue. Water works remarkably well in making sure that the pastry adheres to the other pastry. And just put on your leaves. That looks very nice. We're ready to glaze the top of the pie. We are going to use 1 egg yolk and 2 tablespoons of water. And use a soft bristle brush to not tear your pastry or to make marks on your beautiful pie. Work quickly because you want to get this cold pie into a hot oven, preheated to 450 degrees for 15 minutes. You'll then lower that temperature and bake the pie until it's done. That may take an hour, it may take an hour and 15 more minutes, but it's essential that the juices in the middle of the pie are bubbling. So see now, I'm just sprinkling, a light sprinkling of this sparkly sugar. So get it in the oven and set your timer. Now this apple pie took 1 hour and 35 minutes to bake. The way I can tell the apples are done is with a bamboo skewer, and you can just go into one of the vent holes and push down through the pie. I meet no resistance, meaning the apples are cooked. And the crust itself is glistening with that sanding sugar. The pie looks done. A great tomato tart with a topping of cheese and confit tomatoes, a little bit of thyme and some roasted garlic. A savory, gorgeous tart. This is a great crust. It's very similar to the pâte brisée, but I'm adding an egg to it, a whole egg, and a little less water. So it's 2 cups of flour, all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and just mix this up. We're using the food processor again, which makes the pastry so quickly. 1 stick of unsalted butter, which is 1/4 pound, and it is cold. All the ingredients are cold, the flour, the sugar, the butter. And now cut this in. And now we're going to add 1 egg. I'm going to just mix that egg up before I add it into the dry ingredients. Now blend that in. and add anywhere between 2 and 3 tablespoons of iced water. Try not to get any ice in your pastry. Now wrap this in plastic wrap. This dough gets chilled for at least a half an hour before you use it. While my crust for the tomato tart chills, I am going to prepare the tomatoes. Now you can use sliced tomatoes and cheese, but we're doing something a little bit differently. We're going to confit the tomatoes. And so I am peeling first and then seeding the tomatoes. I make a little X in the bottom of the tomato. I immerse the tomato into boiling water. I have a big bowl of iced water right here, and it's like 30 seconds they stay immersed in the boiling water. And you just look to see when they peel. Oh, there, that one started to peel. See that? Now just put that into the cold water. This is the way you can peel dozens and dozens of tomatoes for canning. There, and let this just chill and put them into a bowl. This is the fastest way I've found to peel the tomatoes. And now to seed, just once you get the tomato peel off, see how easily it comes off? You want to then cut this part of the tomato off. And there are the cavities with all the seeds. And I just squeeze. Now onto parchment goes the peeled tomato. And these are already prepared. Now another thing that we want to put into this tart is roasted garlic. An effective way to roast garlic is to encase it in a little parchment package with a little bit of salt, olive oil, and just make a little package like that. The garlic will steam and roast. That's going to go into the oven at the same time as the tomatoes. And we just want to put a little olive oil on each tomato, sprinkle with salt and pepper, fresh thyme from the garden, and have your oven preheated to 275 degrees. Cook these very, very slowly. When they come out, they're going to look like this. They do shrink, and they are now the essence of tomato. That is exactly what you're looking for. Now, we're going to roll out our pastry to fit this removable bottom tart pan, those black steel. I love those, and I've always used those. Flour your surface very well. We're going to blind bake. Now, blind baking means that you are going to basically cook in the oven an empty tart shell. Flour your rolling pin, and you want to make sure that you roll it out without any cracks. Now spray your pan just very lightly so that the ultimate tart will come right out of the pan. And then gently release your pastry into the pan. That is a nice looking crust. Now to reinforce the sides of your tart shell, fold the dough down, making the sides a little bit thicker. This really does help remove the shell when it's baked from the pan, and it also holds the filling in very nicely. You can very quickly just use your rolling pin and go like this and take off all the pastry with your rolling pin. So now I'm going to dock with a fork. This will prevent the crust from bubbling up. You won't be able to fill it if that happens. And then line it with a piece of parchment paper. And you fill it with beans or nuts or clay weights, whatever you have. These are my lentils that are about 10 years old. And I use these for all my crust. And press this down into the shell. Now get this right into a 425-degree oven and check it after 10 minutes. Then you remove the lentils and let it brown in the oven. So now here is your roasted garlic. Look how easily it slides out of its casings. So 1 head of garlic or 1.5 heads per tart. And you spread this with an offset spatula all over the bottom so everybody will get a little bit of this extraordinary flavor. There, okay. Now, a little sprinkling of cheese. Now here we're using Comte cheese, C-O-M-T-E. It is a semi-hard cheese, kind of like a Gruyere, and a little bit of thyme. And we're going to put a little bit in the bottom like that. And now place the tomatoes. These have cooled, and you just pick them up with a spatula and start squishing them in place very tightly. Kind of looks like a beautiful flower. So for each 11-inch tart, you're going to need 24 of these oven-dried tomatoes. Okay, now a little bit more salt, not too much, and a little bit more pepper, not too much, and more cheese. And we grated 10 ounces of the Comte cheese, and I'm going to use it all. And this is going to bake in a 375-degree oven until the cheese is melted, and serve hot. Do you know how many gallons of maple sap it takes to make 1 quart of maple syrup? Believe it or not, 10 gallons. And that's probably why maple syrup is referred to as liquid gold all over New England. Let's begin first with the crust for this pie. Use a little bench flour, spread it all over your counter, and make sure the crust is well chilled. And I'm constantly lifting and flouring underneath. You can also flour the pin. If it gets too soft, put it right back on a cookie sheet in the freezer and just let it harden up a little bit before you proceed. Now, to get it into here, just roll it quickly on the pin, lightly and quickly. And I'm using a glass pie plate. These glass pie plates are really handy. You should get yourself quite a few of them because as you give pies away, they disappear. And I'm trimming the edges neatly, leaving an overhang of about 1/2 inch. And this is going to be pre-baked, blind baked, the old bakers said. So notice I'm just rolling this under so that it is right on top of the rim. And another reason for using glass is that when you bake it, you can look at the bottom and see how nicely brown it is. Okay, so now get that right back into the refrigerator. Now the next thing is to make many, many, many of these little maple leaves. And I need lots of these. So I'm going to roll out another disc, get it nicely thin. Okay, so now start cutting. If they're not too warm, take the back of a sharp knife. So go like this, and you just have to do 1 or 2 lines, just to make it look more like a leaf. When these are done, put them right back into the refrigerator. And now we want to apply the leaves to the edge of the pie shell. We have 1 egg. This is the glue. And you can use a small brush like that, and you just put an egg wash all the way around the edge and on the back of each leaf. This will really help them adhere well to the edge. Doesn't that look gorgeous already? Now, when you finish, put this right back into the refrigerator and chill again. A beautifully applied edge, and now carefully brush your egg wash over all those maple leaves. Why do this? Well, it gives a very beautiful, glistening brown edge to your maple pie. Now make sure your oven is preheated to 375 degrees. One more step. Fold this parchment like this and like this, point to edge. This will fit in, see? But better yet, go like this. Crunch it all up. This makes it go in even faster. See how nice? This is an assortment of red kidney beans, black-eyed peas. You can have lentils. Rice works very well too, although it's not as heavy as a bean. And they fill every nook and cranny. Put this in the oven, 20 to 25 minutes, and bake until it is all an even golden brown. So here's the crust. You can look at the bottom, gorgeously brown, it is ready to be filled. And the filling has very few ingredients. 1 cup of real maple syrup. Bring this to a boil and reduce it till it gets a little bit thicker than it is. In the meantime, we need 4 egg yolks and 1 whole egg. Save your whites. So beat that up. Add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of the best vanilla, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Oh, this is the fragrance, the wonderful spice. Okay, so the eggs are ready and the syrup has reduced itself. Add your heavy cream, 2 cups. And if you were standing here, you would love the smell. It's so fantastic. Bring this back to a simmer. And now add this very slowly, whisking at the same time to your egg mixture. Warm those egg yolks. Then put this mixture through a sieve. Now make sure your oven is heated to 300 degrees so it bakes at a low temperature. Should be just the right amount to come up to the maple leaves but not cover the edge. Bake it until the custard is just set but still a little bit wobbly in the center. It's going to take about 45 to 60 minutes. So here is the finished pie. It is cool, and so now just take out the slice. Comes off very nicely. That's a very pretty slice of pie. Indiana sugar cream pie. Doesn't that sound great? It's otherwise known as Hoosier pie, and it comes from the Amish and the Shaker communities that settled in Indiana in the 1800s. Made from cream and milk and butter, the Great Lakes region is famous for. This rich custard pie is the official pie of Indiana. It's sometimes called a desperation pie, a category that refers to pies made when fresh fruit wasn't available or money was short, but milk was plentiful because there's lots of cows. First, make the crust. Now this is a pâte brisée butter crust, and it's been rolled out, the edges turned under a double edge on the edge of the glass pie plate. And notice what I'm doing. I'm trying to make an unusual pointed pie crust. So what I'm doing is making all slanted cuts going one way, and then you just do a slanted cut this way, and those little triangles come popping right out, and you can do this in a matter of a couple minutes. It's so cute. It looks like shark teeth, even though there are no sharks in Indiana. So see, look, all done in just a matter of minutes. Very cute. What will you do with those? Well, you could probably roll them out and make a little jelly tart. So here's the crust. You can now blind bake this, and you do want it to be cold when you put it into your preheated oven, 375 degrees, lined with parchment, and your weights. The store-bought kind of weights or the dried bean kind of weights. We always use dried beans, which the first couple times you bake your crusts with beans, they smell like beans, but after 10 or 15 years of use, they just become objects with no scent whatsoever. 375 degrees. Bake it for about 25 minutes, and then carefully remove the weights and the parchment and let it continue to bake for about 15 minutes more. Now for the filling, the custard. Now see, we have a crust already baked. Oh, by the way, if your crust starts, the little points start to darken, just put a 10-inch quiche tart pan ring over the points and they won't get too brown. Half a stick of butter. We're going to make a roux first, and 1/4 cup of flour. This is your thickener for the custard. A roux is basically a cooked mixture of fat and flour, and it's one of the cornerstones of sauce making. So we just really want to cook the flour a little bit, 2 minutes or so, over medium heat. We do not want it to darken. just to get the floury taste away. And then add 1 cup of heavy cream and 1 cup of whole milk, 1 cup of sugar, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Bring this to a boil and then reduce to a simmer and cook for, barely a minute or 2 until it really thickens up. So now we're going to pour it right into our beautifully baked crust. Be careful of the points, you don't want to break them. And you can just pour right through your strainer. If you have your husband or a friend, it would help right now to scrape out the remaining custard, but I'll manage. So beautiful. And get this right into your preheated oven until the filling is slightly set, about 25 minutes. Remove from the oven, cool on a rack, and don't serve until it is completely cool. So, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm really desperate for a piece of pie. I need a pick-me-up. What could be better than a piece of desperation pie, where indeed the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Look how nicely it cuts. Indiana cream pie, Hoosier pie, desperation pie. It's so cute. Nut pies and tarts can often be too sweet, so to offset that sweetness, I experimented. And I found that adding a little grated lemon zest to the filling nicely balances out the flavor of the sweet pecans. So roll a half of a pâte brisée recipe into a 10 by 13 inch rectangle. And I always keep a ruler in my kitchen drawer just so that I can see that I'm pretty accurate. So far this is 11.5 by 8.5, a little further to go. And keep turning your pastry. If it turns and lifts easily, it is a well-made pâte brisée. If it's sticky, if it's tearing, it just makes it more difficult. So to get this into there, what do? Roll it up on your pin carefully, don't press down, you just want it very loose. And you just lay it right over the pan. Press into the corners, the sides. Take your rolling pin and just go across the edges like that. The edges fall off and you have a nice square edge to your tart shell. This should be chilled well before you line it with parchment and pie weights. And if you follow these directions, you will have a very excellent pie crust. You can put this right in the freezer. 15 minutes is all you need to rest the dough and chill it. And now, take a piece of parchment paper, crumple it all up. This makes it much easier to place in the bottom of the pastry. A big sheet unwrinkled will pop right out. Now add your pie weights. The beans hold the pie crust in the bottom of the shell, so you don't get a pie crust that has all kinds of convolutions in it, which would not be good for a filling, would not be able to hold a filling. So this is going to give you a very well-formed, well-shaped, rectangular pie crust. Right into a 375-degree oven until the edges are golden brown. That takes 15 minutes. So just to be clear, the crust baked at 375 for 15 minutes. The beans and parchment were removed and the crust continued to bake until it's this beautiful golden brown, another 15 minutes. Let it cool before you proceed with the filling. If you're doing this for a holiday or for a big dinner, you can make this early in the day and it's ready to bake later on. Beautiful, beautiful pie crust. So now the filling. 4 eggs. Break them up in a bowl and add 1 cup of dark brown sugar. Crumble the sugar, dries out so quickly, so crumble. 1 cup with the eggs. Get all lumps broken up. Add 1 teaspoon of salt. 3 tablespoons of melted, cooled butter. Every Southern cook has a wonderful pecan recipe, but this is a kind of a Northeast version. And the zest, the bright yellow zest of 1 lemon. You could use orange zest in this, and that's very nice too, but oh, I love lemon and pecans. And add 1/4 cup of molasses. The cup has been oiled, so the sticky ingredients will slide right out. And then another 1/4 cup of white or light corn syrup. This keeps that filling both flavorful and soft enough so that you can really enjoy it. Yep, it's coming right out. Stir this all in with a whisk. Look at that color, isn't that beautiful? And 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So that's the liquid part of the filling. Shake off your whisk and stir in 1½ cups of pecans that have been quite finely chopped. You can see the texture. They are, maybe less than 1/8 of an inch chop. And stir that up. This gets poured right into your pre-baked crust. And your oven, by the way, should be reduced to 325 degrees. So pour this right into your shell, distributing the nuts evenly. And now place your pecans in a diagonal design right on top of this delectable, sugary, lemony filling. And take your time because this takes a lot of time, but it really is worth it. Now these are the jumbo, unbroken pecan halves, and you do not want to use broken ones for this particular job. So just finish this off. And what's nice is that they just seem to fit exactly right. There. So this goes into the 325-degree oven. Bake until the pastry is a little bit more browned and the filling is set. That's going to take 45 minutes. Then cool and serve with freshly whipped cream. So the pecan tart has cooled and it is beautiful. It looks crunchy and delicious. And you see it's quite sticky, so I'm leaving the bottom pan underneath. But it will cut nicely into squares. And on a buffet table, it is the perfect pecan tart for any occasion. Named after the Austrian town of Linz, which is the 3rd largest city in Austria, Linzer Torte is an impressive raspberry jam-filled dessert, richly flavored with almonds and hazelnuts and a hint of cinnamon. Its signature lattice pattern top is a cinch to make if you have one of these little fluted pastry wheels. We have to start first with the nuts. I have already a cup of blanched almonds, and these are hazelnuts, which are also known as filberts. And if you heat these in the oven, the skins start to loosen, and I find the easiest way to rub the skins off, just put all the nuts between 2 bar cloths and rub. The roughness of the towel removes most of those skins. Grind the nuts in the food processor. Don't grind them too much. You don't want them to turn into almond hazelnut butter, but just grind them into a flour-like substance. This looks very nice. Oh, and they smell so good. So there's our ground nuts. We want to sift all the dry ingredients together. 1 1/3 cups of all-purpose flour. That's 1/3 cup and 1 cup. 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. These are 1/4 teaspoons. And 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder. 2. And 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And you can add your nuts also to the dry ingredients because they're going to be added all together. Loosen any out of the nooks and crannies of the food processor. So here you have a nice, nutty, fragrant, dry ingredient that's going to go into the rest of the dough. Cream 1½ sticks of butter with 1 cup of granulated sugar, and we're going to add 1 large egg yolk. So save the white, reserve that. Oh, and what a beautiful yolk that is. Add that to your butter and sugar. And then add your dry ingredients. Tort means cake in German. There are many different kinds of torts. Sacher Torte, Linzer Torte. And then add the rest of the dry ingredients. So here's our dough. I'm making it into a small rectangle and cutting it in half evenly. Half for the bottom of the Linzer Torte and half for the lattice top. And this should be pressed into the bottom of a 10-inch removable bottom tart shell. So using your fingertips, push that dough a little more than halfway up the edges of the pan. And we don't want all these fingerprints, so we're going to smooth out the bottom with this nice little measuring cup. And Linzer Tortes, oh well, they were very popular in our house. So that's pretty, very, very well done. Now the next is the lattice top. And I find that it really does work very well if you just roll the dough out between 2 sheets of parchment. So roll the dough out to about 12 inches in diameter, all even thickness. We're going to cut strips once this dough has chilled. And chilling is important to make it easier to handle. So this gets chilled and the dough gets chilled. See how easy it is to move around if you have it on paper? Very, very good. So chill this in about 30 minutes until it's firm. So into the unbaked crust, put 1 1/4 cups of raspberry jam. Very pretty. To create the lattice topping, cut even strips, and there should be 12 strips of equal width. And these are not woven, you can just lay them on top of one another. And I found that the easiest way is to lay these strips with a spatula like this, just inside on top of that beautiful jam. So beautiful and a little nerve-wracking. This dough is very short. They call it short. It will break because it's brittle. And now lay the next strips in a diagonal on top of the first. Looks very good. If the dough is really, really cold, as I have it, it works absolutely just fine. Put this back into the freezer for 30 minutes until it is 100% firm, and then bake in a 350-degree oven, rotating your pan about halfway through until the torte is golden brown all over. That takes about 40 minutes. It's very nice to sprinkle lightly with confectioner's sugar through a sieve. And this cake is best eaten the day it's baked. A little goes a long way. This is a very, very rich nut and jam torte.